So a lot of times students ask me, which book to read in this particular genre or from which, like if I want to introduce myself to a particular subject, then what books should I get myself introduced with, and so on, genres, subjects, areas, and so on. One of the most common subjects or areas that they ask me about books from is philosophy, for obvious reasons, because you get passages from philosophy and so on. So I'm going to talk about some books which will introduce you to those topics, which I think are interesting books, and then we will go a little bit higher also. So, but a couple of caveats, one of them is that these are just my suggestions. These are the books that I found interesting of the few that I have read. It doesn't mean that you have to read these ones. You can read some other ones also, figure out from your friends, parents, relatives, or even the internet. Uh, so these are just suggestions. There is nothing known as the 5 books you have to read for CAT or GMAT, or I'm talking about books like these, not subject matter books, not books of maths and critical reasoning and so on. So in these, it really doesn't matter. It depends on what clicks, what doesn't click, and so on. So these are just my suggestions. Okay. The other thing I want to clarify is that when I'm using the word philosophy, I'm using it in an academic sense rather than in the colloquial everyday usage sense. In the common everyday parlance, philosophy is synonymously used with uh, spiritual self-help kind of books and so on. That's okay, but that is not what I will be focusing on, because the kind of passages you get uh, are mostly from academic philosophy kind of areas. Okay, so academic philosophy, what does it mean and how does it differ from the other one that I was talking about, self-help, spiritual, and so on, uh, mysticism. So academic philosophy is now divided into 5 broad domains. Okay, ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, epistemology, and logic. All right, and ethics has to do with what is good, what is the right thing to do, morality, and so on. Aesthetics has got to do with what is beautiful, and is there such a thing. Metaphysics has got to do with the first principles behind things, metaphysics, beyond physics. So, where do we come from? Why are we here? Is there something called a meaning to life? What is existence? And, so on. Epistemology basically means knowing about knowing, or knowledge about knowledge. So, what kind of knowledge is possible through what means? Is there something called right knowledge versus wrong knowledge, or correct knowledge versus incorrect knowledge? Is it even possible that such a thing exists? Is there a difference, meaningful difference, between subjective way of knowing things, intuitive it is called, versus objective or empirical way of knowing things, and so on? That's epistemology. And the last one is logic, which sort of runs across the other 4, in the sense that logic has to do with method. Okay, so you obviously learn theory and so on, but the idea is that you write and think logically in a rational way and so on. So today in academic philosophy, if you say things purely based on personal opinion without any reasons and so on, taking the help of something like intuition, it is not really considered to be worthy in the academic philosophy. So it has to be rationally substantiated with the help of reasons, examples, can you prove it, so on. So that's basically, roughly, very superficially speaking, what is philosophy in the academic sense. So let's begin. This book, I have used it in a few videos. You may have watched them and so on. This is a very nice book to start philosophy. In fact, almost all the books in this series, it's by Oxford University Press. It's called the Very Short Introduction series. Quite a few books that I have read from this series have been very nice. So you can start with this. So this is broad. You can go narrower. So you can go, for example, there is a book called Ethics, very short introduction. Aesthetics, very short introduction. Bertrand Russell, so that's a philosopher. Bertrand Russell, very short introduction. Aristotle. So if you want to go there, you can do that. Now, thankfully, this book is not purely Western centric. Okay, so it has something from Indian philosophy and others. But of course, since the author is a Western philosopher, his expertise is in Western philosophy. So, of course, mostly it talks about that. But thankfully, it does talk a little bit about Buddhism and so on. However, if you really want to go there, then maybe before this or maybe after this book, you can get into Indian philosophy, a very short introduction, and so on. So there are books like that. I'll talk about this aspect in a little bit. So this is a very interesting book, very nice book, very thin book, a nice entry point to philosophy. And the thing with very short introduction series is that every book of very short introduction series towards the end has something called where to go next, or further reading, what to read next, where to go from here, basically, after this book. Similarly, this book also has talked about that. So that's an interesting thing, so that the book itself can tell you if you like something, then of that particular thing, you go and check the further reading part, and you read that. Okay, it could be overall, you may want to read something in general philosophy more, because of course, how much can this book cover? Or you can go into specific parts of the book that clicked with you and so on. Okay, so very nice book, a decent book to start. If you want to start with philosophy, however, you want to see it in action. Of course, this is also like that, but proper into action, and then by one of the greatest philosophers, definitely of the 20th century, but maybe of all times. His name will definitely be there in the greatest philosophers of all times. Bertrand Russell. I just took his name. So this is Problems of Philosophy. Again, a very thin book. However, he's doing philosophy. So he's introducing us to the basics of what kind of things philosophy talks about, or what are the things that philosophers are interested in, and how do they go about it. That is what is happening. So philosophy in action. More challenging than this book, but very interesting. Again, you may or may not like it, because you may find these questions stupid. Thankfully, he has the very last chapter is called The Value of Philosophy, and that's a very nice chapter. In fact, if you are going for this book, then I would suggest that you read that chapter first, because a lot of times you think, what kind of nonsense is this, what is going on, and so on. So I'll read the first paragraph of the last chapter, The Value of Philosophy. So he's saying, having now come to the end of a brief and very incomplete review of the problems of philosophy, of course incomplete, how much can you do here? It will be well to consider, in conclusion, what is the value of philosophy and why it ought to be studied. What's the point? It is the more necessary to consider this question in view of the fact that many men, under the influence of science or of practical affairs, practical philosophy is not practical, it is too dreamy and whatever. So, in view of the fact that many men under the influence of science or of practical affairs are inclined to doubt whether philosophy is anything better than innocent but useless trifling, you indulging in trifle matters, hair-splitting distinctions and controversies on matters concerning which knowledge is impossible. So since knowledge is impossible in those domains, why to waste time and so on? So this is what and he has done a good job, by the way, of telling us the value of philosophy. Okay, so very nice book, but maybe not the first one, but if you are the types who is not scared of diving in the deep the very first time, pretty cool, very very nice book and so on. Okay, now if you want to know about philosophers, like you may have heard the names Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, of course, Bertrand Russell himself, and whatever. Then, if you want to know about them, and through them you try to figure out what philosophy is all about, especially Western philosophy, then I doubt if there is a better book than this, even though, as you can see, it is very thick and it is written by the same person, Bertrand Russell. I think you can already figure out that I quite like him. So, History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. It's a very thick book. However, you can. So the introduction is amazing, very nice. So you, after reading the introduction and maybe first couple of chapters to figure out what the ancient Greeks thought and so on, then you can pick and choose a philosophy. Even though if you go linearly, then it will be better in one sense because you'll know what came before. So in case he's talking about some idea discussed earlier, so you're already aware of that. But it's okay, you can still go to individual philosophers and so on. But a very thick book, however, absolutely brilliant. It was written about 60, 70 years back, if not earlier, and it is still going strong. In my opinion, the test of a book is for how long has it survived, and the longer it has, chances are that the more worthy it is of, one should read it. So that is the thing. So it's a very, very amazing book. All right. Okay. Now this is slightly different in the sense that this may click to quite a few of you. What this person Mark Rowlands has done is that he has again introduced philosophy, but with the help of sci-fi movies. Okay. So the title is The Philosopher at the End of the Universe. The sci-fi kind of a title. And the subtitle is Philosophy Explained Through Science Fiction Films. Okay, so The Philosopher at the End of the Universe by Mark Rowlands. So what he has done is he has taken some nice classic sci-fi movies and through them tried to explain some concepts of philosophy, especially Western philosophy again. So for example, he's taken the movie Matrix to discuss the nature of reality as discussed in academic philosophy. He's taken the movie Star Wars to discuss good and evil, the movie Aliens to discuss morality, a Terminator to discuss the mind-body dilemma, or mind-body problem, and so on. You of course you need to first watch that movie and then read that chapter. I think it'll be exciting for a lot of you because this way you end up watching or rewatching some good movies and then through them understand some concepts of philosophy. It's a nice concept, I think, going about it this way. There are books which have discussed similarly the concepts of philosophy with the help of some popular books, like for example, Lord of the Rings or even Harry Potter and so on. So this is with the help of movies, so you can do both the things. So again, interesting book. Okay, then as I was saying that most of these books are Western centric, and so here's an interesting book in which what a contemporary philosopher, a philosopher who's still writing, very nice, called Julian Baggini. He has he spent a few years figuring out what is it that other civilizations, other countries, what do they think in terms of philosophy and so on. So he came up with this very nice book called How the World Thinks. Okay, and it is so as the subtitle says, you may have seen it, A Global History of Philosophy. So what he has done is he has discussed various so he has taken some topics which are discussed in Western philosophy. However, those topics he has seen from the outside Western philosophy framework point of view. Okay, so interesting, very nice book. No problem for this book to be your starting point. And Julian Baggini is a terrific writer. I quite like him. In the very short introduction series, I know of at least one book that he has written. He may have written more, but Atheism, a very short introduction, has been written by him. So again, you can go for this. Very nice. On similar lines, but a different application, is this book called How to Live a Good Life. Okay, and a guide to choosing your personal philosophy. And this is an edited book. What that means is that it's not written by one person. It's written by many people, and there are some editors who have combined these things and edited it and so on. And this also looks at, so basically, obviously, it's about a guide to choosing your personal philosophy, how to live. And what they have done is given us a few options. All right, that you can read this, you can go with this philosophy, you can go with that philosophy, and so on. So, for example, uh, there is Buddhism, obviously, then Confucianism from Confucius of China, Taoism or Taoism, whatever, howsoever you want to pronounce it, from China, Aristotelianism, Aristotle's philosophy, Stoicism lately has become very very popular. I'll come back to that. Then Epicureanism from Epicurus, Hinduism, okay, that may interest quite a few of us Indians. Judaism, Christianity, progressive Islam, ethical culture, existentialism, pragmatism, effective altruism, and secular humanism. Existentialism, you may have read here and there, and so on. So yeah, again, very nice. Certain introductory aspects of each one of these philosophies is mentioned and then discussed in terms of what do they say about how to live a life. So you may have more than one reason or motivation to read this book, not just to introduce yourself to philosophy, and that to not just Western, all over the place, but also maybe, how to live in terms of what, based on my disposition, my proclivities, my interest, based on the kind of person I am, which philosophy makes more sense to me. And then you can go deeper in that philosophy. Again, further reading is there. Okay. Now, if you, I told you that there is something called Stoicism also here, and Stoicism has become extremely popular, and it has been popularized by a lot of people. So, for example, one of the editors, Massimo Pigliucci, an Italian scientist, he was is an evolutionary biologist, but turned philosopher. He did a second PhD in philosophy, so now living in US. He's written a whole lot on Stoicism, and then of course Ryan Holiday. I'm forgetting. I haven't read him much. I've read a little bit. So these people have done a lot to popularize it, but I would suggest that why not go to the source. This is what I always say. Okay, fine, you may read like one introductory stuff, if at all, but especially if the original is not difficult, is not arcane in the sense that not too dense. You can always, why not go to the originals? Figure. And Stoicism, thankfully, is very convenient in the sense that you can start it. It won't be a problem. So I have three books from Stoicism in case you are interested. So I think the easiest to get into is one of these two. Uh, Either Letters to a Stoic by Seneca, okay, or Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor, supposedly one of the greatest of all times, and one of the nicest. Probably because he wasn't a Stoic in the sense of being a philosopher. Of course, he was a king, but he followed Stoic philosophy a lot. And this book is actually his notebooks. He used to write down some thoughts, and most of those thoughts are extremely Stoic in nature. By Stoic, the Stoicism. Okay, by the way, the word Stoic quite often is used in a fairly negative sense, and in fact, one dictionary meaning of that word is that, which is that someone who is emotionless, so will be poker faced and not smile and no pain and no laughter and so on. That's not really what the original Stoics were. They had some aspect to this because of which it has been extrapolated as this thing, but that's not true at all. So that's not what Stoicism is about. It's a very rich philosophy. It's very similar, in my opinion, to Buddhism. Of course, there are huge differences, but it's very similar in terms of its, what should I say? The German word is, even though it has become an English word, is Weltanschauung. Okay, so I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but what that means is a personal philosophy of life. So in terms of the Weltanschauung, Stoicism is very similar to Buddhism. The way, the outlook towards life. So basically, so for example, one example in which they have extreme similarities is that the cause of the problem, the cause of suffering is desire, okay, and hatred. And so this is where both of them are extremely common and have very similar things to say. So these are the two you can start Stoicism with, and of course, then this is so these two were Romans, Seneca and Aurelius. He was earlier before them, Epictetus, Discourses, Fragments, Handbook. Again, this is not really written by him. Compilation of what he used to teach by one of his students. Okay, so Epictetus was one of the earlier Stoics, the Greek Stoics. So Stoicism came from Greece. However, it was most of their things, whatever they wrote, got lost, in some way and so on. So very little remained, and it was revived by the Romans, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. So Epictetus is not, again, tough to get into. So you can start with Epictetus, but usually it is recommended that you start either with Aurelius or you start with Seneca. So these are a few books wherein you can start. A few books which I don't have, but I've read them through Kindle. So one of them is called Think. It's written by Simon Blackburn. It's a beautiful book. It is just the only problem is that in India, if you want to buy it physically, slightly expensive. Maybe because it hasn't come here, so it has to be sort of imported, even by, let's say, Amazon if you're ordering there. So, but it's a beautiful book. However, again, not for the first timer. For the first timer, I think the other ones that I've talked about are better, and then you can go to a book like Think. But a very nice book, and Simon Blackburn writes to me really well. It's amazing. It's a very nice book. So you can read that, and then of course there's so much. For example, Bertrand Russell himself has so much to offer. He wrote a lot for a lay person. Okay, so a lot of books. His The Conquest of Happiness is extremely nice, very nice. Then this sci-fi person, he's a philosopher, Mark Rowlands. He's written a book which is one of my favorite books. It's called I have it. Second. I can't. Maybe I took it out and then I kept it here somewhere. So it's called The Philosopher and the Wolf. Okay, by Mark Rowlands, The Philosopher and the Wolf. It's a beautiful book. And again, something like, it's like philosophy in action. So he got a wolf pup. Some people say that it's not really a wolf pup, it's probably a dog pup, whatever, it doesn't matter. But so he, brought it up and lived with it for many years, it or him, however you want to say it. And, according to Mark Rowlands, what he learned being with that wolf. So very nice book. So you can read that also. There are many, many books. However, you have to start somewhere. So please do from these, or of course the internet is a wide ocean. You can figure out from there. But these are just my some of the books I like, especially they're not very challenging to a beginner. Of course, there are other books that I like which may be challenging. For example, David Hume and so on. But I don't want to get into that. You should, So the ones that I discussed are beginners and above and slightly more above, not too dense. That I can discuss maybe some other time. Okay, so that's what you can read in philosophy. All right, thanks a lot, and I hope to see you again.